Our long national nightmare is over. The Dallas Cowboys have hired their 10th head coach. We'll tell you who it is next.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. And Landon, we finally have coaching news. The Dallas Cowboys have hired Brian Schottenheimer to a 4-year deal, making him the 10th head coach in franchise history. It seemed like this is where it was trending the last 4 or 5 days, and now it's official.
Yeah, I don't think, I think some of us were holding out hopes of some sort of evasive maneuver happening in the last minute, but it just didn't seem like that was that was going to happen. It felt like this was something that was kind of inevitable for the last 2 or 3 days. So not shocking, but I will tell you what, the timing of it is pretty shocking. And frankly, I think it does say something about the fact that the Cowboys decided to drop this on a Friday night, like not even late, not even just like news dump late, but like after business hours late. It's pretty surprising, and I think it's frankly kind of telling a little bit.
Yeah, basically 10 p.m. Eastern time on Friday night, which tells you maybe they were working late into the night to get the deal done, or maybe they just wanted to bury this news a little bit before we all talk about the East West Shrine Bowl, the AFC Championship game. I guess there's another game being played this weekend. I don't know. Somebody told me. I want to talk about Brian Schottenheimer because, first of all, let me back up. I said at the very beginning of the process, if you're an everydayer, you've heard me say this every day, that I wanted this to be a deep and comprehensive coaching search, right?
Yeah.
Interview 8, 9, 10 different coaches from different backgrounds outside of the organization to see what is out there and get some different voices. They interviewed 4 candidates: the current offensive coordinator, Brian Schottenheimer, who they hired, Kellen Moore, their former offensive coordinator, and then Robert Saleh and Leslie Frazier. Frankly, 2 coaches that just satisfied the Rooney Rule for them. This might work out. We'll talk about how Brian Schottenheimer could be a good coach, but the process is terrible.
Terrible. And I think that's the kind of, and I think that we should do it as much as we can, a job to separate Schottenheimer and whether or not he's going to have success from the process. But it's really, really hard to separate those two right now because the process does kind of just reek of failure. It feels like a backup of a backup plan to a large degree. And that's, again, I don't want to take this. I don't want to mean this as a slight towards Schottenheimer, who I think has been in the league for a long time. And as I've kind of said throughout the week, I think he has some qualities that may make him a very good head coach. We'll find out. But I think there are obviously other elements to this that are very concerning, including what you mentioned, just not a very broad search. Clearly, they had something very specific in mind, which is, Schottenheimer kind of fit the bill for, which whether that's, a coach that has familiarity with Dak Prescott, maybe some malleability about the length of contract and who's, offensive and defensive coordinator. We'll see exactly how all that plays out. But clearly, they had a situation kind of predetermined in mind. Schottenheimer fit that bill better than, your normal kind of Joe Brady's or Kellen Moore's or maybe not Kellen Moore, but like a lot of the other kind of eligible head coaching names that are out there. And I think that they, zeroed in on that pretty early on after moving on from the kind of Dion noise that happened in the initial process. And after that, it just felt like it was a case of Stephen Jones having to convince his dad that Brian was the best way forward. But it's hard not to get the sense that, that they potentially got no's from both Mike McCarthy, obviously got a no from Mike McCarthy, and then also Kellen Moore, and then just simply moved on to the next guy who was the kind of third on their list for this situation.
And I guess what's frustrating to me is, like, if you go back to, let's say, like 2008, or sorry, 2010, right, is when they fired Wade Phillips in season, and they promoted Jason Garrett from interim head coach to full-time head coach. They didn't move on from Jason Garrett until after the 2019 season. In 2020, they interviewed only 2 candidates, Mike McCarthy and Marvin Lewis. And this time they've interviewed only 4 candidates. So basically, since 2008, they've had 3 openings, and they've interviewed 6 total candidates for that head coach job. They just, for whatever reason, they don't really want to go out and try to find outside candidates unless they're really, really well known, like Mike McCarthy.
Yeah, and they're clearly looking for very specific situations when they're doing this. I think they're eliminating a lot of candidates just based on, kind of casual conversations with their agents, I think, beforehand. So, and frankly, they're just not even probably making phone calls to most of these folks that they don't have some kind of relationship with, or know somebody that has a pretty close relationship with them. So, it really does limit, again, just kind of speaking on the process, it really does limit the candidates that you're getting, which obviously limits your ability to kind of move on to something else. I will add in too that I hate that this feels like kind of another in a long continuous chain of coaches. I mean, you mentioned the Wade Phillips interview. I mean, Wade Phillips had Jason Garrett, and then Jason Garrett had Kellen Moore, and then Kellen Moore made his way into Mike McCarthy's situation, and then Mike McCarthy had Brian. So like that kind of never-ending chain of like folks who basically have had that sort of Air Coryell background, or at least some association with that original offense that Dak has been a part of. It feels like that has been carried on throughout, and Dak hasn't really been given, I want to call it, the opportunity to work with a coach who has something, kind of different in mind, or is looking to kind of do something different. So it just feels like a series of guys that are kind of fitting that original offense that Dak liked, around him, with just like only slight tinkering going on around the edges.
I did want to ask you about Jerry Jones's quote when he told ESPN that Brian Schottenheimer is going to be the new head coach. This is the direct quote from Jerry Jones. Brian Schottenheimer is known as a career assistant. He ain't Brian no more. He is now known as the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. That's a very strange way to say that Brian Schottenheimer is your next head coach. I don't know what to think about it. It's just very odd.
I have no idea what that means, honestly. Like, I mean, I don't know. Like, I'm not aware of Brian meaning anything other than the name, if he was trying to do some kind of play on words.
I have no idea.
Yeah, I'm worrying about, Jerry's mental state more and more.
Well, I mean, if you believe some of the reports from this week that it was Stephen Jones and maybe the rest of the front office that wanted Brian Schottenheimer, and Jerry pushed back on that a little bit, I think the quote makes a little bit more sense. Like, hey, he's been a career assistant, but this is who we're going with because this is what everybody else wants. I don't know. It's interesting. I want to talk about how this might play out for the Cowboys, what the rest of the coaching staff might look like, because we are starting to hear some names on both sides of the ball. Let's get to that next. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. It's playoff time, and if you're like me, you want to make the most of these final weeks of football action, and that is where PrizePicks comes in. If you love football and want a chance to win real money while watching the games, PrizePicks is the place for you. It is the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. And with PrizePicks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. You can make your picks in less than 60 seconds. And whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or just want to cash out quickly, PrizePicks has got you covered. And with over 10 million members and billions in winnings, it's clear that people are loving this platform. This week, PrizePicks even has a free pick for the NFC Championship game. Jaden Daniels only needs 1 passing yard for you to win 1 square. And here's our official offer. Download the app today. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We are breaking down the hiring of Brian Schottenheimer. Big picture, how are you feeling about the hire? Not the process, but the hiring of Schottenheimer now that it's official.
I think that I have felt that Schottenheimer has some qualities that I'm looking forward to seeing how they play out as head coach. I obviously the play calling aspect is what I'm most concerned about. It's been stated that that he is going to be calling plays wherever he goes next before this was announced. I don't know. I haven't seen anything yet. And it's, like I said, this is just breaking. So we're kind of learning as we're going, but I haven't seen anything yet that's kind of refuted that. I'm assuming that he is going to want to call plays. So that's where my concern lies now, is what is that going to look like? What's the offense going to look like? Is it going to, how different from what we saw with Mike McCarthy is it going to look like? Is it going to be the same? How much are they willing to branch out? I think I'd like to know more about exactly what he's going to look like as a play caller, because the truth is, like, the last stop he was in before this was a very similar situation where he was walking into an already established offense and he was trying to kind of conform to what they were already doing with Russell Wilson. And frankly, I understand, like, again, we've talked about the Russell Cook, and, retroactively looking at that, is that even really, something that he should have been criticized for? But beyond that too, he also was able to kind of go into that situation and, have some success. So the issue is not necessarily that he has been a super unsuccessful coordinator. It's more just he hasn't been an offensive coordinator in a long time.
A real offensive coordinator.
Yeah. Right? And the guy that he was under, as a non-play calling offensive coordinator, like the concern we had with that offense was that it was stale. Right. So is he like looking to kind of branch out and do some more stuff and add some more motion and some more, interesting elements to the offense to kind of make it work better? Or is it going to be kind of stale and stagnant like we saw, and even worse because he's a guy who's trying to call plays and be a first-time head coach? That's my main concern. If we could find a way to make everyone comfortable around that, I don't think I have a problem necessarily with Schottenheimer as the person who is able to be a leader of men. I think anyone who hasn't listened to, go back and listen to Brian Schottenheimer in the interviews and the way he interacts with the media. I mean, he sounds like he sounds like a head coach. He sounds confident.
Every time I've watched his like Tuesday press conferences that he would do, I was always impressed. And it seems like the players did really like him. Here's what I have to say about the hiring in general. Brian Schottenheimer was not my first pick or second pick or third pick. I wanted them to interview Ben Johnson. I wanted them to interview Joe Brady, Todd Monken. Obviously, they didn't do that. But I think I said on this podcast, I think Brian Schottenheimer has more head coaching qualities than Kellen Moore, who was probably the only other realistic option. So I preferred Schottenheimer of those two options. Again, I think there were better options out there. I do want to say that generally, NFL fans are terrible when it comes to picking out which head coach they think are good, right? Go look at the tweets under the Dan Campbell reaction when the Lions hired him, or go look at what people said about Sean McVay when the Rams hired Sean McVay. Now, that doesn't mean anything when it comes to Brian Schottenheimer, but generally Twitter gets this wrong all the time when it comes to who's a good head coach and who's a bad head coach. Yeah. And what a lot of times makes these coaches is, number one, your talent, right? We've seen this time and time again. If you got an awesome roster, sometimes your coach doesn't need to be great. Even coaches like Andy Reid, when he doesn't have an awesome quarterback, can only get his team so far. So your talent matters. The other thing is who they hire as their offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, and the assistants they put around him is really going to determine the ceiling of this team. We're going to watch a team this weekend with the Philadelphia Eagles, who I think most people think Nick Sirianni is either a bad or average coach. might take his team to the Super Bowl for the second time in 3 years because he surrounded himself with awesome coordinators. If the Cowboys could do that with Brian Schottenheimer, I do think there's a chance that it could work. But if it's just handpicked guys that the Joneses like, we could have some problems.
Yeah, and I imagine, and first of all, let me just say this: if the Eagles lose on this conference championship game, I wouldn't be shocked if Nick Sirianni got fired. Honestly, like, I mean, that's like, and I think he's just that kind of middling. So there is certainly ways to do this. And again, it's like it's a three-legged animal that you have to kind of find a way to redistribute between the talent of the roster, the scheme that the coaches provide, and like how it all kind of comes together, like under the head coach, right? So I think that he, as far as the play calling aspect of it, that's where I have the concern. The obviously the player retention thing, that's going to be. I don't think that's not really related to the head coach or who the head coach is, right? The Cowboys have got to find a way to get players in this team through free agency and the draft, and that's going to be a concern no matter who the head coach is. So that's on the Joneses, and that's our own concern. But as far as like, being able to have a leader of men, have somebody that can like make proper calls on game day, like I think that Brian Schottenheimer can do that. He's been around the league well enough to kind of to be able to handle that sort of situation, maybe even better in some ways than Mike McCarthy, because just I think that a lot of that is personality driven. But we just don't know the particulars yet. Is he how is he going to differ from Mike McCarthy as a offensive coordinator and as a head coach? Like that's where I think we need to kind of see like the lines of delineation. And then the other thing, like you said, the assistant coaches, like who specifically to me, who's going to be the offensive line coach? That to me is like it's just as important almost as the offense. Well, certainly, I think it's more important than the offensive coordinator at this point. If the offensive coordinator isn't going to be calling plays, right?
Well,
So
I mean, nothing is official as of this recording right now, but it sure seems like wink, wink. London Wells is going to be their offensive line coach, the current tight end coach, and the Cowboys are going to pay him very, very well. I know you are a big fan of London Wells. He's a former, I think he was a guard at Southern Mississippi when he played. He's been an assistant offensive line coach, but this would be his first ever full-time offensive line job. Does that make you a little nervous?
Was he an offensive line coach for the Giants for a year? I thought
He was I think he was the assistant offensive line coach for like 5 years.
Okay. So no, it doesn't at all, actually, because I think I'm that big of a fan of London Wells. Frankly, everyone was talking about losing Al Harris, and we should mention that Al Harris has also officially signed with the Bears. And I hate to lose Al, but to me, London was the number one assistant that the Cowboys had to retain. Like I feel that strongly about how talented he is. And I was, I think John Owning was famously pushing for this, and I was pushing for it last year at certain points, or maybe it was 2 years, whatever Solari was before Solari got hired. I wanted London to be the offensive line coach then, So if this is the case, this is a strong first step. Now we'll see exactly that does unironically that does open up a job at the tight end coach position, which I have.
I wonder who they can get to fill that spot.
I can
no
see
idea.
it's like the cartoon where like where like Bugs Bunny runs through the wall and he has a Bugs Bunny shaped hole in the wall. I can see a Jason Witten shaped hole in that tight end coach's office right now. It's so obvious. So
So back to the offensive coordinator. I wouldn't be surprised if this is one that takes a little bit of time. I bet you they'll have a defensive coordinator hired by Monday when they do the introductory press conference.
We've already heard.
I wouldn't be so sure about the offensive coordinator thing, because if Schottenheimer is going to be calling plays as the head coach, then maybe you're looking for a different type of offensive coordinator, right? Maybe you're looking either for somebody that really specializes in the pass game, or what I'm hoping for, somebody who really specializes in the run game that could really help transform this rushing attack. I wouldn't expect it to be some big name that people have heard of before. My guess is going to be somebody who is relatively unknown, that they're trying to develop to help Schottenheimer without calling plays on game day.
So that the question that becomes, does that mean we're probably out with Blasco? I mean, it'll be interesting to see like which one of
Maybe.
these folks that are going to be internal hires. I mean, obviously we've lost a couple folks, but
Well, that's what I
that
was
is what's
gonna
going
say.
to be
It does feel like that Schottenheimer is gonna have somewhat of his own staff. Robert
yeah,
Prince, their wide receiver
it's
coach,
already gone.
he's gone. Al Harris is gone. Bones Fossil is gone. So I do wonder if this staff is gonna look somewhat different.
Well, again, I mean, again, he has been a coordinator in the league for 20 plus years, if I'm
He's
not
got lots of
mistaken.
connections.
So he's got lots of and again, because of his dad as well. I mean, he knows almost everyone around the league. So it's not like we're gonna be only pulling from McCarthy, tree folks or people that he knew through Dallas. It'll be Seattle, it'll be the other stops, the Jets while he was there. All the relationships he's had along the way, he's gonna know folks and he's gonna pull from those relationships.
All right, let's talk about the defensive coordinator hire because that to me is now that they've decided on their offensive line coach, it appears the defensive coordinator position is one that is very, very attractive. Let's talk about who the Cowboys might hire next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. It's all incredible. One of my favorite events was going to a playoff game a couple of years ago. The vibes, the energy, the excitement was unforgettable. Now Gametime has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Gametime Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. There are so many great features on the Gametime app. One of my favorites is the panoramic view. You can see exactly what your seats are going to look like in the app before you buy. Plus, you can toggle the all-in pricing so you're not surprised with your fees at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day. One in the morning with Tyler Rowland, one in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins, available wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Landon, we need to talk about this defensive coordinator job because the timing of this is all hilarious to me because as I'm sitting on my couch, I'm watching Yellowstone, just enjoying my Friday night, and I get a text that says the Cowboys believe Robert Saleh could be their next defensive coordinator, right? And then about 5 minutes later, the Cowboys announced that Brian Schottenheimer is their new head coach. And then about 5 minutes later, the 49ers announced Robert Saleh is going to be their new defensive coordinator. So we know that it's not going to be Saleh, even though the Cowboys seem like they wanted it to be him. But there is another name that has been mentioned over the last 15 minutes. And again, this is all happening fast.
Yeah.
And actually, this is how fast it's happening. It literally just happened as we're talking on air.
Oh,
They've literally
wow.
just
It's been announced?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so that's how fast, right?
Yeah.
Matt Eberflus is their new defensive coordinator, who was with the Cowboys years ago I think it was a linebacker coach.
Somebody got to go to Facebook and find those things his wife said on the way out the door because it's pretty funny.
Those could be deleted. Facebook. All right, Facebook. Eberflus was I think the linebacker coach in Dallas. Then he went to Indy to be the defensive coordinator there. Did a really good job. Went to Chicago to be the head coach. Got fired. Now he's back as the Cowboys defensive coordinator. Fill us in.
Well, I mean, first of all, I think it's been a long time since he was here, right? And obviously, he's been a head coach, a defensive coordinator. When he left, the question was like he was probably the Al Harris at the time, like, or the equivalent, right?
Yeah.
When he's with Dallas, he was the hot assistant who they knew was gonna be a defensive coordinator at some point. And I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, he may have gotten an interview to be the defensive coordinator, like before he ended up leaving, and the Cowboys ended up choosing their own head coach. So, I mean, there's obviously history here. He went off to go to the Colts, and I think he did a pretty decent job. Just to kind of to fill you in, he is sort of from that cover 1, cover 3 middle of the field close kind of coverage school of thought, right? But he's definitely more evolved than some of those, than like the Gus Bradleys of the world, So I think that's kind of where his worlds are coming from. He's done a pretty good job where he's been. It took a while for it kind of take hold in Chicago, but I mean, when they've had health at different points and good
They got
bodies,
progressively better the 3 years he was there. He didn't get
absolutely,
fired for his defensive coordinator stuff. He got fired because of
for his head
clock
coaches.
management and the offense.
Yeah. So, and I think that's a pattern that we see a lot with the Cowboys, right? Is a former head coach as their defensive coordinator. I think again, it really makes sense to get with Schottenheimer, even though Schottenheimer is not like a young head coach. He's a first time head coach. So having another guy that is a head coach on the staff, I think is just another crutch for him to kind of lean on, even though I think they're similarly aged. So just a guy that has done a good job at designing defenses and understands how to design a game plan. I think he's been a pretty decent defensive coordinator in the league. So, a solid pick, I would say.
So, and I know this question is coming out there. Is he a 4-3 guy or a 3-4 guy? I mean, it doesn't really matter in today's NFL. But he's born and bred as a 4-3 guy, right? Like the traditional wide defensive ends. Your defense is built on your 3 technique and your corners being awesome. Mike is going to be a pass rusher in this defense.
Mm-hmm.
What's fascinating to me is this defense really needs like defensive tackles that can get up the field and get to the quarterback. I can't imagine a defense that's better suited for Osa Odigizua. Do they bring him back?
I mean, that's a good question. It goes back to our conversation about what happens with Schottenheimer is going to be hinging a lot on the personnel that's going to be on this team. And I think that's a fair assessment on specifically on the defense too, because this is another scheme that kind of goes back to a traditional let's play fast so your athletes can get all over the field quickly sort of mindset. So that means that we're going to need guys who can get up the field. I think obviously you've got pass rushers, you've got some defensive ends. It will depend on the health of some folks, but defensive tackle is obviously a glaring need, specifically if Osa's out the door. And like we said last year, even if you did re-sign Osa, I think you still have needs at that position. So I think defensive tackle was going to be a problem and a need spot for the Cowboys, regardless of what happened for the defensive coordinator. So this doesn't really change that. Maybe it changes the type of defensive tackle that you're going to be hunting specifically.
Yeah, it's interesting. He's very different from Mike Zimmer as a defensive coordinator. Like on third downs, he's not going to be sending a bunch of exotic blitzes. Nope. It's 4 guys. I'm looking at the blitz right now. 2022, 18% of the time they blitzed. 2023, 22% of the time. In 2024, 27%. So it did go up a little bit, but he's not
Zimmer like that. I mean,
no.
He's closer to Quinn. It's close. It's a drop 7. It's a drop 7 sort of defensive style, right? Like they want to hit you with they want to get to you with only 4 pass rushers if they can, and then play coverage behind. It's going to be a lot of cover 1, cover 3. I imagine. Actually, I'm interested to see. Like, do you have the coverage percentages there? I
don't have. I was just looking at the blitz rate. 19th in blitz rate in 2024. So if you were somebody who didn't like the Cowboys blitzing a lot last year, you got your wish. Eberflus is your guy.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see. It is kind of again another flip flop back to the type of style of defense that the Cowboys obviously had success in 2023. So that'll be interesting to see exactly how that translates.
Well, we're gonna have a lot to talk about next week between offensive coordinator hires, the head coach, East-West Shrine Game, Senior Bowl. The Cowboys are fantastic when it comes to creating content, and we do the best that we can to cover it, even on a Friday night news dump here on the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher. I would say we'll see you Monday, but with his team, you never know. It might be Saturday. It might be Sunday. I'll just say we'll see you next time.